I want personalization.
I want to know what problem of mine you're going to solve, and are you going to make our commercial team more successful?
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Pitch Please on the Enablement Brew. I am Carly Lehner.
And I'm Malvina Elsai, and we're so excited you're joining us for yet another episode. And on today's show, we are joined by Freddy Daues from Spekit, and I'm super excited about today's chat. But before we dive in, obvious question, what is everyone drinking?
I have tea, and I'm at a WeWork today, so I have one of the WeWork mugs. So I'm just boring peppermint tea. So nothing too interesting today for me.
Freddie?
I'm drinking full strength black coffee. I'm thrilled to be on the podcast and even more thrilled to be here at 8:30 Mountain Time after St. Patrick's Day. And so usually I actually drink half calf because I like to drink coffee all day, and that helps me drink 5 cups without feeling any guilt. But this morning, after some Guinness last night, some full strength coffee is right what I need.
You have to show, I love the mug, love the pink. I need to get one like that.
I know, I love it.
And
all right, Malvina.
it's a little bit later for us, I guess, in the day due to the time difference. So I'm actually on a tea, which I never have a tea on this show. I'm usually the very caffeinated co-host, but today it's definitely tea.
I like your mug. Is that a Christmas mug?
It is. I was chatting with a good friend of mine today who still, believe it or not, has her Christmas tree up. Thoughts about that?
I'm surprised it's like not dead and has caught on fire.
Gotta be artificial. Gotta be artificial at this point, I would think.
It is. And at this rate, I'm telling her, just keep the Christmas tree and make it like into an Easter tree and put like little Easter bunnies and Easter eggs on it. And hey, you can have it up all year round.
I mean, we're already at the middle of March. Like, to take it down now and just have to get it back up again in December.
What an inconvenience.
Well, make it a year-round thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome.
Carly doesn't subscribe to that.
I totally forgot that fake trees were a thing, like back home, like we would always just go chop down a Christmas tree.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, Freddie, thank you for reminding me that there's fake trees out there.
Yeah. Well, side note, I know we're not here to talk about Christmas trees, but I did cut down my first Christmas tree this year in the woods, like with a saw, and it was really, really cool.
It's pretty fun. Yeah. All right.
Man.
All right. Well, let's talk Spekit. So, Freddie, I'd love for you to tell our listeners a bit about your journey at Spekit and how long you've been there, and then like we want to hear what Spekit does and who you sell to and all that kind of fun stuff. So let's start with your background a little bit.
Awesome. No, thrilled to be here, and I love Spekit, so also really excited to talk about Spekit, of course. So I started with Spekit 2.5 years ago. My first day of work was actually on the Dreamforce floor, Dreamforce 2019, before we lost live events for a while, and I was the 14th employee at Spekit. And now we are 150 plus. So it's been pretty phenomenal growth. We were a very small team, me and one other person reporting to Melanie Fillet, our CEO, and co-founder. And it was just kind of like, hey, where do we fit? Like, we're brand new. What do we do? Now, all of a sudden, we've got, hundreds of customers, and it's just been really, really exciting to be in this space and to be with a fast growing company like this. And so for what we do is we provide just-in-time learning. So a lot of companies struggle with getting people the right information at the right time. And so I've actually got, if it's all right, I got a little story that I can share my screen and show you guys some slides.
Love that.
Okay. And I know slides aren't usually the most exciting thing. And I just realized my color's all messed up. So I probably should have prepped a little bit more for this. Make sure I was looking great. But anyway, so I've got a little story to tell. So meet John and Jane. John and Jane are 2 employees. Probably you guys have sales. You guys are enablement folks. So you guys have sales team. John and Jane are 2 people on your team. And they're not selling right now. They're on vacation. And they arrived together to Yellowstone National Park, which I'm sure, even though it's a domestic one, Malvina, I'm sure there's great, awesome national parks in the UK.
I've been to Yellowstone.
Nice. It's an amazing, amazing park. And John and Jane arrive there together, and they want to conquer Yellowstone National Park. They want to go see everything. And they know when they get there, there's some really important things they need to be aware of. There's grizzly bears, there's geysers, waterfalls, huge hot acidic pools, and things that they need to know about and need to be aware of. But they decided to go two different ways to learn about these two things. There's obviously more than one way to skin a cat. So they learned about these things in two different ways. John received a data dump. He received all the information at once. He got to the beginning of the trail and had a giant sign, had to memorize the map, had to memorize every turn, where things are, and what he needed to look out for. And so because of that, he forgot several steps and ended up running into one of those grizzly bears that he was trying to avoid, that he'd been taught how to avoid the grizzly bear and where to stay away from the mother and her cubs. But of course, as he's navigating his journey, he forgot. Jane, on the other hand, had a lot of support during her hike. She had trail markings while she was there. She had a handheld map. She had knowledge just in time at the exact moment that she needed it. And so Jane was able to conquer the trail and domesticate the bear and go on her merry way without getting into trouble. And so what Spekit's all about is serving up that information that a rep needs in the workflow. So if they need to learn about a Salesforce process, we deliver that training in Salesforce. They need to learn how to do a sales loft cadence. I watched the last episode with the sales loft guy. We deliver that knowledge of how to create a sales loft cadence in sales loft so that the knowledge that a rep needs is directly in the workflow wherever they need it.
Love that story. I mean, the power of storytelling, I think, just as you were going through this, like I'm imagining the two characters in Yellowstone getting chased by the bear and the other one, on her hike, totally owning it, conquering everything that comes her way. Incredible. Love that.
Yeah, thank you. And so most companies, the problem usually isn't information. Like usually companies are giving great information. Like like training, the companies spend a lot of resources on creating amazing training. The challenge most of them have is delivered up front, is that most of those resources go, if it's onboarding, to the first 6 weeks of boot camp, and then maybe a mentor and just Slack and email support on from there. And it's just like people don't remember what they learned on week 2 of boot camp when they actually need to go execute it. Or if you're rolling out a new sales methodology or any other change, most of that training goes up front, and it's nearly impossible with all the things a rep needs to know to navigate a deal and ask the right questions and understand the real problem the prospect has that their product or service can solve. To know all those things is really difficult without being able to access that knowledge just in time.
Love that. So if you look at organizations today and you look at Spekit, what would you say is the biggest challenge that you're solving? Because it's not lack of data, it's not lack of content. Does it purely boil down to the delivery of the information?
Yeah, you can. Actually, I know that you mentioned you love stats on the last call from the sales off one, so I got some stats for you as well. And the big problem we solve is really the human brain can only remember 10% of what it learns a month later. That's this orange curve. And so if training isn't reinforced, most of that goes almost to waste because you can't absorb that. There's too much stimuli that enters our brain on a constant basis. We just have to forget it. That's how evolution works. We've evolved that way. But if we can reinforce that, we can actually maintain that 80 to 90% reinforce that adoption because we understand what we need to do and we have that repetition constantly in our brain. And according to McKinsey, and this is a crazy number because it's a T, not a B or an M, $1 trillion is estimated to be lost due to low productivity from unused resources and employee turnover. And what Spekit does is we can solve a lot of that because we are keeping people engaged and in their workflow and knowledgeable, because most people do leave organizations. There's a multitude of reasons, but one of the common ones is because they don't feel like they're going to be successful. And one of the reasons they don't feel like they're going to be successful is they don't have the proper training. They don't have the proper resources.
I love a good stat. Like we said, the forgetting curve is a really interesting one because for enablement professionals, like that is like one of our biggest challenges is train a team on a new product launch or a new process, and everyone smiles and nods their heads. And then a couple weeks later, they're like, hey, how do I process this in CPQ again? And then you find yourself retraining over and over and over again. So it is definitely an interesting approach. So how do you guys, like, I guess, differentiate yourselves from like traditional like learning management systems or some of those approaches?
Yeah, great question. And one thing that you mentioned, like with the CPQ training, challenge folks like you in Enablement have is it's probably not just one person that's asking you that CPQ thing. It's probably 10 different reps asking the same question in Slack that you've got to recreate the video and reshare the answer, because usually those FAQs aren't unique. And so what differentiates us is that the LMS and that learning platform, that style hasn't really evolved since the 90s. It's destination learning. And so the LMS was invented in the 90s, and the way we consume it, sure, there's a lot more bells and whistles and it's fancier and looks nicer, but the fact that it's a destination hasn't evolved in the last 30 years, really, until Spekit. Because when you need to learn something, as in the real world, you're used to getting it on demand when you need it. You pull out your phone and you can just search and self-serve the answer. You don't have to go into an encyclopedia and scroll and find the right thing and go read what you need to know. And that's more the style of what an LMS does. And that's not how people want to learn. They want it to be on demand, and they want it to be natural where they're already working. And so by embedding that knowledge and making it accessible from anywhere, we can drive adoption of learning resources and self-service, because we make that actually the easiest option, as opposed to asking people like Malvina and Carly, oh, what's the answer? And I got to wait for you guys to get back to me. I can actually move faster and more efficiently by self-serving, which makes the whole business move faster and more efficiently.
I love that. I have actually two questions that immediately come to mind. My first one is, do you often see yourself competing for the same budget that maybe would be going for these enablement tools, right? These learning platforms, or is it something separate?
It's something separate. So our big challenge is, like a category creator, is that we're usually not borrowing pre-created budget. We need to create our own line item. And so there's pros and cons to that. It really makes us really need to be firing on all cylinders as a sales organization and understanding what the real problem we're solving for, because our champions need to be able to go to executive teams and CFOs and say, hey, we need to buy this most likely we're not going to be able to borrow budget from somewhere. We're going to have to create budget. So we really work closely with all the people that we work with on what problem are we actually solving? What's the cost of that problem, the status quo, and what's the overall impact Spekit can have?
Absolutely. And when you look at the personas that you're going after, is it just enablement, or actually are you maybe starting off with someone else and then you're going into enablement? Who's that key persona or key stakeholder that you engage throughout the process?
Great question. So enablement is a very common ICP for us. I'd say probably the most common, because they're the ones who are working so closely with sales organizations to deliver training. And if training isn't ultimately adopted, then enablement is kind of spinning its wheels a lot. That it's great to create training, but ultimately enablement's creating training and creating resources to be used, to drive behavior, to drive results. If enablement's doing all those things and they're not being if those assets aren't being used because they're buried somewhere, or they've received training on CPQ, but they still don't know how to create a quote, then those resources really aren't going to the best use. And so enablement people love Spekit, but also VPs of sales, they need their people to adopt MEDDIC or whatever methodology it is. And if they're not, then they're probably not going to achieve their results. L&D folks, sales operations, they're the ones who often are responsible for making sure tools are adopted. So there's a broad array of stakeholders. Sales enablement is very, very common though.
This actually reminds me of a story that Carly shared with me. This was maybe a few months ago. About a training program that Carly was building out. It took her months to build out. And then when she finished, actually everything has changed. So you had to start all over, right, Carly?
Yes, that was with CPQ. And yeah, we had prepared, and then leadership changed like the week we launched, and the roles and responsibilities for who was supposed to do what completely changed. And I like spent all this time on a great video to like explain the process, and
Oh my goodness. That's
it
maddening.
changed.
That's maddening.
Yeah, very maddening.
And so yeah, and a quick Spekit plug. I guess I'm here to talk about Spekit, but shout out to G2. We are the highest rated platform on G2, and one of the reasons is we've won awards like easiest to set up and easiest to admin, because we are a completely code-free solution. I know we're not going to get into a demo today, but I could actually teach you how to create content and embed it in the workflow of your employees in like 10 minutes, and then you're off to the races. It's a really lightweight, simple platform to use.
One thing that also comes to mind actually as we're having this conversation, and this is probably one thing that maybe scares all enablement managers, enablement leaders, is time, right? Because we often see all these great tools, they're going to revolutionize how your sales force learns and how they work, and it's going to make them more productive. But before that happens, there is loads of implementation. You have to write the content, put together the documents, find the collateral, speak to the subject matter experts. And I'm wondering if that's an objection that you also see, coming your way. Like, how much time is this going to take me to get this off the ground, right? Am I going to have to spend sleepless nights building out content, or can I leverage, something?
Yeah. Oh, we have tons of resources that you can leverage, like out of the box training content that we give. Plus, we're just naturally lightweight. And we also have an entire content team that can help you put your existing content into Spekit for you. But one thing that we always ask people like yourself, it's how often are you at answering questions of things that are more of the FAQ variety, that don't really require a ton of thought, that's just should be something that either you've already trained on or would be easy to self-serve. And if the answer to that is a lot, then you're actually creating content constantly. You're just creating content in single use variety as a one-time thing in Slack that you're then going to have to go create that same content to share the same thing with another rep. So people in sales enablement and training, they're creating content all the time, but if they're creating it in a one-time variety, then it's not scalable. Whereas Spekit, yes, there is some content you have to create. Of course, we're delivering training, but it's going to be scalable and usable time and time again.
Love that.
A great answer. But I mean, yeah, way to overcome that objection. It's like you've done this before.
I've done this before.
I was going to ask, like, what is, because you joined Spekit so early, you've probably seen so much growth and change. Like, what do you love about working there? Like, what's the culture like?
Oh man, I mean, that's the best part, to be honest. Well, there's two best parts. One is we have insane customer love, where like our customers just really appreciate what we do. And because it's just so different than what they're used to, like we've got these awesome videos be like, oh my God, I've been waiting for this my entire life. Like people have envisioned what Spekit does that they've never just actually, when they can actually see it come into fruition, it just blows their mind. So our customer love is one thing, but then secondly, we have just a phenomenal leadership team. I mentioned Melanie, our co-founder before, and Zari, our other co-founder. They're just not only like brilliant, motivated, driven people, but they're also just amazing humans and people that you want to run through a wall for. And then that's just cascaded down to our executive leadership team below them, and even middle management, and all the reps that are on the ground with me. It's just a really, really amazing group of people that I love going to work with every day.
I love that. That's amazing. As we're talking, and I think for any enablement leader that's maybe listening to today's episode, we all want to make our sales teams more successful. How do we do that, right? How do we ensure that we're not putting in hours and hours into building out content that maybe you load up once, but it's such a nightmare to edit because maybe it's, an hour-long class, right? And we all talk about,
I said guilty as charged.
Right? Because we all talk about micro-learning. We all talk about learning in small little increments and having that on-demand learning. But I'm going to be really real. How many of us actually do it in practice? right? And I think that's maybe, the surprise. We all strive for it, but like the expectation and the reality, I think across many organizations is completely, disparate, completely
Different.
different.
Yeah.
Mhm. Totally. And I think the challenge that most organizations have is how do you deliver microlearning? It's just that if microlearning is just going to sit in a drive as a small little chunk, then it's going to be probably hard to find because you're going to have a million small little chunks. Versus like what makes us unique is we can actually embed that where they would need the knowledge is they can get it right where they already are, so they don't have to go think and go find it. Because like if you don't have a mechanism to deliver that, it's going to be really hard to go with that micro learning model, which is the ideal way people want to learn.
Yeah. And I'm sure you see this in conversations that you're having, right? We've created all of this content, we have everything written out, no one looks at it, right?
Mhm.
Maybe it's been visited once in the first 3 weeks when someone joined the company and then hasn't been looked at since. And
Right.
it's, this phrase like you can lead a horse, to water, but you can't make it drink. And the way that I'm kind of hearing and understanding Spekit is, well, you kind of can because you're putting it right where they need it, right? So that excuse of it's somewhere in a G drive, it's somewhere in a dock, almost disappears because you're bringing that to the forefront.
Yeah, it's like giving that horse an IV, so you don't even care if it wants to drink because it's plenty
Love
hydrated.
that.
I love that. I was literally thinking, I was like, it's like a camelback backpack, and like all you
Yeah.
got, an IV is even better. That's a better analogy. Um, yeah, I think, yeah, I'm very intrigued by what I'm hearing. Like just in time learning within your platform of choice. There's so many. I mean, at Andela, we have more tech than I honestly think our sales team, even myself, knows what to do with. So having
Mhm.
something that can plug into all of that and provide training, I think is a really interesting proposition for sure.
Yeah, and you guys are not uncommon. Most companies have just tremendous tech stacks. And so where we fit in is we aren't just another level of tech that you're adding to the stack. Is you can see Specky, our octopus mascot, behind me on the
Love
on the
that.
virtual bookshelf. That's actually a metaphor. So it's cute mascot, of course. So we love the cuteness. But also the metaphor is that your knowledge and all that information is the brain, and then the tentacles are where your reps can access it. So whether they're in Gmail, Slack, Salesforce, Outreach, SalesLoft, LinkedIn, you name it, they can have access to that knowledge where they're already working.
I love that. I was talking to someone a few weeks ago who said we have so much tech, it's almost like boxes of half-eaten pizza, and none is actually fully utilized. And
Mm.
I loved that analogy because it's so true, right? Like the challenge today is not having enough technology, it's having too much technology and actually utilizing, you know, it to its fullest capability.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, most companies aren't tech deficient; they're adoption deficient.
100%. Absolutely. Um, well, Freddie, thank you so much for joining us on Pitch Please, a new spin-off by the Enablement Brew. I know probably plenty of our enablement listeners are going to be Googling Spekit right away because it definitely sounds like a really cool platform to use. And it sounds easy to use for the reps, which is probably the most important thing. If it's literally staring them in the face,
Yeah.
how could you not use it? So yeah, no, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you had a good time.
I had a wonderful time. Yeah, absolutely. And please Google us. We're spekit.com, or you can reach me, Freddie at spekit.com as well. Happy to connect with any of your awesome audience. And Melvina and Carly really enjoyed being on the show today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming on. That's a wrap for our episode. We'll see you next time for a brand new episode. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.